president says that the GOP needs to do more. Here's what he tweeted yesterday. It is very sad that Republicans, even some that were carried over the line on my back, do very little to protect their president. Joining us right now is Florida Congressman and House Freedom Caucus member Ron DeSantis. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Got to tell you, Congressman, I've been asking this question over the last week, and that is, does the GOP really want this president to be successful? Here we are in the 11th hour in terms of getting health care done, in terms of beginning on tax reform, and they just can't get it done. Do you think the GOP wants this president to be successful, sir?
Well, I think there are some in the party who are permanent dwellers of the swamp in D.C. who look at it as say, look, even if the president's in office for 8 years, their life is in Washington. They're going to be here long after he leaves town. And I think that they conduct themselves with that in mind. Most of us, though, I think the American people sent us here to make America great again. They want the president to succeed, and they want us to be doing what we told them we would do. So I think most of us are trying to get this stuff done, but there is inertia with part of that permanent political class in Washington who I don't think still to this day really accepts the president.
So tell me what you're expecting this week from your colleagues in the Senate. We're all trying to understand what they're going to be voting on. Is it going to be a clean repeal this week, or is it going to be a tweaked plan that they had initially in place to, the better health care plan? What do you think? And once we do get a vote, what does that mean for you and your colleagues in the House?
So here's what I think. If you voted for something 18 months ago, and that same bill is brought forward, and you campaigned on it, and you promised you'd repeal and replace Obamacare, then vote yes, so that we can do this thing. I don't understand. I understand if there's some Republicans that have always just said they didn't want to repeal Obamacare. That's their position. I disagree with it. But you have some of these people who ran on repeal, voted to repeal multiple times, and now are saying that somehow we can't do it. That is what frustrates Republican voters to no end.
So, Congressman, there's a lot of question about even what are they going to vote on this week. How does this all work behind the scenes? Like, how are they going to decide? How are we going to figure out what's really going on? I think that there's so many questions out there. I'm just curious how you see it from your perspective.
Well, I think they're looking to get to 50 votes. They have a very tight margin. And you have the repeal only, which repeals the taxes and the spending. That would then allow us to start legislating some of the replacement elements separately, or you can do the bill that the Senate was working on where you have repeal and replace. Some like the repeal first, like a Rand Paul. Others insist on there being a replacement. So I think they just got to come to a consensus. I think either way, whichever one of those two they pass, I think when it comes to the House, I think the House will then pass the Senate's product. I don't think you're going to see a long, drawn-out conference committee. We need to bring certainty to this problem, and if they have a path to 50 votes, then I think that'll be the path that finds its way through the House.
Do these Republicans realize that 35% of Americans, this is a Bloomberg survey, view this health care issue as the biggest issue that the country faces, ahead of jobs, ahead of Russia, ahead of all these other things? If this doesn't get done, what does it do to the Republican Party near term and in the longer term? I know some of these senators aren't really worried about repeal or voting against the repeal and replace because they aren't up for election for 3 to 5 years.
Well, I'm glad you pointed out that statistic, because you go in Washington, you think the only issue in this country is Russia, Russia, Russia. That's all the media wants to talk about. That's not what most voters want to talk about, and I think the jobs and the health care are very important. 80+% of the American people either want Obamacare totally repealed or they want major overhaul. You only have about 20% of the American people that think it's fine as is, either leave it or just very minor tweaks. So that's the mandate, I think, that we have to address a core concern of the American voter. Look, there are things in the bill I wish it was bolder in certain respects, but you got to come to a consensus, and I think now's the time to do it. And the House, we should not be leaving on a 5-week recess if health care is not finished. I think that sends a terrible signal to the American people, and we have to use all the time that's available to us. You don't give up 5 weeks and then complain that you just didn't have enough time to do your work.
I agree.
Congressman, along the lines of the 80% that you mentioned, 73% of those who were in Obamacare would voluntarily opt out if they didn't have the mandate. How widely appreciated is that amongst your colleagues that this is something that they're being forced to do as opposed to something that they want to do?
It seems it's not appreciated as much as it should be. I think some of my colleagues really take these CBO numbers as gospel, and I think that's a big mistake. I think if you look at those numbers, they're based on a lot of implausible assumptions. I mean, for example, the CBO says 4 million people who are on Medicaid, which is a free program for the recipient, not to the taxpayer, but to the recipient, that if you don't have an individual mandate, that they will voluntarily relinquish the Medicaid benefits. And that just doesn't really make much sense. They also say that on the exchanges, you're going to have 8 million more people on the exchanges next January than you have right now. Nobody believes that. So I think you have to look at this stuff, take some of the analysis, read it, but take it with a grain of salt if it's based on assumptions that are implausible.
Now, I think it's a really important question that Mitch asks, because we've been hearing these CBO scoring now for a week about how 22 million people are going to be without health insurance, and the fact is that's because 73% of those people will opt out because they no longer have the gun to their head. They no longer face a fine if they didn't get insurance. And people don't understand that. It's a real easy criticism to throw out there, 20 million people without insurance, and it's dishonest. Because
well, that's why if you look at the CBO's analysis, a full repeal of Obamacare, the House bill, which is a repeal replace, the Senate bill, which is a repeal replace, that has hundreds of billions of dollars in there, the uninsured is all the same for precisely the reason you say, because if you take away the mandate, you know, they count, that's like 15, 16 million. The other, I think, big chunk of that is they're projecting future enrollment in Obamacare, which is unrealistic and simply won't happen. So that's millions and millions of people as well. So when you look at really how they're doing it, it's not really very strong in terms of their analysis.
Yeah.